The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ken Brown. I'm with the National Association of Local Government Environmental Professionals, also known as NALGEP, and I'd like to welcome everybody to this afternoon's webinar. As everybody knows, we're going to focus on tips for successful Brownfields grant applications, and we have a great lineup of speakers for you today. I have to make sure I can switch the slides. So with us today we have, hang with me for 1 second, please. There we go. Sorry about that, the brief technical interruption. But again, welcome everybody to today's webinar. We have a great lineup of speakers, particularly Mickey Hartnett and Ignacio Dayreet. I'm sure many of you know them, but they have a wealth of experience both in preparing grant applications, reviewing them for other folks, and in Mickey's case, and I'll give you a little more background, also as a representative of EPA in reviewing applications. First, before we start, I want to give you a little background both on NALGEP and on EPA's Technical Assistance Program. For those of you who don't know NALGEP, we're a national association of city and county environmental managers. We've been involved in brownfields issues since the very beginning, back in the mid-90s when we began working with a group of the first EPA pilot grantees back in the mid-1990s. About 10 years ago, we launched the Brownfields Communities Network, which focuses on providing technical assistance and other information to local governments and other brownfield stakeholders around the country. We hold regular webinars, usually about once every 6 to 8 weeks. We hold regional workshops around the country. We participate in conferences. And this year we will be holding in Washington, D.C., a local government Brownfield Summit, which will send more information out about in the near future, but it will be held sometime this summer. So thanks again for being with us today. I want to give you a little background on the EPA Technical Assistance to Brownfields Communities Program. The TAB program was created many years ago by EPA to provide direct technical assistance to local communities and other brownfield stakeholders around the country. The TAB program provides assistance on the full range of brownfields matters, whether it's community involvement, financing techniques, liability issues, health impacts, redevelopment planning, grant writing, and other items. And this technical assistance is provided through workshops, webinars, one-on-one direct assistance, web-based tools, and also through case studies, amongst other things. There are currently 3 technical assistance, regional technical assistance centers around the country, servicing the various EPA regions. New Jersey Institute of Technology serves EPA regions 1 and 2. Kansas State University services EPA regions 5, 6, 7, and 8. and the Center for Creative Land Recycling serves EPA regions 2, 4, 9, and 10. And NALGEP is fortunate to be working on the teams of both the Center for Creative Land Recycling and also Kansas State University. So these centers and the contact people that you see listed here and the websites that are available, these folks are available. They're on call to help you understand the grants guidance. If, for example, if you have more questions after this webinar today, they're available to talk with you about starting a local brownfields program. They're available to talk to you about financing techniques and a whole host of brownfields issues. So I encourage you all, if you have needs, interests, you just want to learn more about brownfields, or if you need special technical assistance on any issues related to what's going on in your community, you should contact the regional technical assistance centers. And obviously the Center for Creative Land Recycling and Kansas State University are co-sponsoring today's webinar along with NALGEP. Before we get started, I also want to mention that the US EPA has scheduled 2 webinars for next week to give more information on the current grants guidance. On December 10th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, there will be a national outreach webinar, and then there will be a second webinar on December 13th that will focus on the Tab EZ tool in some depth. We'll touch on that a bit today. And just before we get started on the details, again, as background today, we are not going to go into great depth and detail about all the different provisions of the grants guidance, so the EPA webinars will probably provide a lot more detail on the guidance. We're going to focus on, based on our experience, giving you tips and tools that you should be thinking about as you prepare your application, so you can develop the strongest applications possible. And we're going to leave plenty of time at the end for questions, and if you do have specific questions about the grants guidance or different provisions, we'll certainly be here to answer those questions. So, some of you might be wondering who are new, should I apply for an EPA Brownfields grant? Is it worth it? The grants are typically for assessment grants. They're up to $200,000. The same is true for cleanup grants, and the revolving loan fund grants can be larger than that, funding to capitalize revolving loan fund grants. But you might be thinking, is it worth it? Well, our experience over 20 years is these grants, even though they're not huge, and typically one single grant that you receive from EPA is not going to enable you to do everything you need to do to develop or redevelop a brownfield site. There are a number of advantages to receiving these grants. First of all, an EPA brownfield grant for many communities has served as seed funding to help local communities launch ongoing local brownfields programs, in addition to starting to conduct site investigations at priority sites in your communities. So the brownfields funding can be extremely valuable for that. In particular, site assessment funding is extremely flexible. It can be used for multiple sites. It can be used for reuse planning, for health monitoring. You can pay for a portion of local brownfield staff as long as they're focused on site assessment. Funds can be used for community involvement and, of course, for direct site investigations. So these dollars, again, can be quite useful in helping a community get moving on a number of key priority sites in your communities. Number three, many communities have successfully used Brownfields funding to leverage other federal, state, and local revitalization funding. At the federal level, oftentimes once you get an assessment grant and you've performed investigations at particular sites, that can position you to get an EPA Brownfields cleanup grant. Many communities have used their Brownfields funding to leverage funding from other federal agencies such as the Economic Development Administration, the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rural Economic Development Program, the Army Corps of Engineers funding, Department of Transportation funding for transit centers or to support transit-oriented development, and even the Department of Interior for parks and open space funding. So, and then many communities have used their EPA Brownfields funding to leverage state grants and tax incentives across the country. And finally, EPA funding has often been a great tool in leveraging local funding, whether it's using your local community development block grant funding, local tax increment financing dollars, or other kinds of local resources that can be used for redevelopment. Finally, I think it's very important as you're looking at brownfields and the projects that you may be considering and the sites and neighborhoods that you're looking at revitalizing, that brownfields funding is not just a tool to get a particular site cleaned up. It also, these projects typically help you achieve multiple community objectives, whether that's removal of blight, environmental cleanup, transportation improvements, new affordable housing, mixed-use development, new parks and open space, waterfront revitalization, creating a new industrial park for manufacturing. All kinds of community objectives can be achieved by starting with a Brownfields grant. So there are a number of reasons to move forward with these grants. With that, I'm going to now turn it over to Mickey Hartnett. Mickey has his own consulting firm called Brownfields. He also serves as a lead consultant and technical assistance provider with the Kansas State University Technical Assistance to Brownfields program. And Mickey has just a wealth of experience. Those of you who know Mickey know that. He worked for many years at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in the Brownfields program, so he's helped work directly with communities in that capacity. He's also been in a position to review grants that have been written by applicants such as yourselves, and so he has that kind of experience as well. And he, currently in its current capacity, he provides technical assistance to many communities and organizations around the country. So Mickey's going to tell you a little bit about some of the things that he's learned over the year. Mickey, take it away.
Okay, Ken, thank you very much for the intro there. Yeah, I guess the most important thing I emphasize right now, particularly when we're going into a grant proposal period with a huge holiday right in the middle of it, is, you know, if you haven't started today, get started as soon as possible, because a lot of people you want to reach may be hard to reach, you know, in a few weeks, and get information and ask questions. So start as soon as possible, but make sure to go through the grant guidelines. Make sure you get the current guidelines that are out for this next round of grants, not older ones. So make sure you get the latest ones, and also the appropriate guideline for the type of grant you're going to be pursuing, assessment or cleanup or revolving loan fund. And there are some frequently asked questions that's provided every year. The ones for 2014 may not be officially out yet. They're undergoing legal review, so if you go to the EPA website or link from somewhere else, you may be getting linked to the 2013 frequently asked questions, and at some point the 2014s will be on there, but make sure you get the correct ones for 2014 if you're using those to answer some of your questions. And they are a good source of information because a lot of people ask the same questions, so make sure to get that once it's officially available. And one of the important things about the guideline is the format that they provide for the proposal. And that format gets, slightly tweaked, changed, and rearranged a little bit every year. So that's another reason to make sure you've got the current ones. And part of this process is what's called the threshold criteria. And that's the things that get reviewed very first by EPA. And that's a pass-fail type of thing. You've got to get over that threshold or the rest of the proposal doesn't even get reviewed. So those are very important to be looking at first. And some things can take a little time, such as getting the letter from the state office or maybe with a tribe, file the tribal office. And with holidays coming, I'd be working on that as soon as possible. That's not something you want to leave to the last minute. Or you don't even get out of the starting gate. That's kind of what threshold means. So pay special attention to the threshold criteria. Now, there are some tools available. There is a program known as the Tab EZ, and you see on the screen there a couple of websites where you can access that. You might want to go ahead and, if you haven't used it before, go ahead and register for that, have yourself signed up for it. It can save you some work if you look at it first because it does lay out the whole grant guidelines in the current new outline format, and they're currently working on updating that as we speak. So if you sign in today, it may say it's not ready yet, but it'll tell you that come back and check the status, and there's like a please read button on the site. So check that, and once they have it ready, which they're hoping to have it ready by Friday, if you use that tool, that may help save you some work right there and kind of get you jump started on putting your proposal together. But having read all that stuff, you still may have questions, not sure what EPA is looking for. Don't be afraid to ask. Ask questions. Go to the frequently asked questions once they're available, because if you have the question, other people may have had that same question, and it may already be in there. Other than that, check with the TAB programs, the contacts that Ken provided earlier, or call EPA directly with your regional office, and they'll be glad to maybe explain something a little further if it's what you're seeing in writing doesn't make it very clear to you or you still have a question. And once you've got this whole proposal together, then it's important at the end because you may have one person writing the whole thing or it may be a team putting it together, but I would take the whole proposal, especially your narrative part and things like your cover letter too, and have it reviewed by somebody who wasn't one of the authors or the author. In other words, get a cold read on it, maybe several, because people will see things and have questions that aren't evident to you as the author or authors because you're just too close to it. And listen carefully to those questions. Don't dismiss them, or dismiss them, because if they have that question reading it, then down the road the reviewer may have the same questions. So that's an important step that comes probably later in the process. But you could even do it on chunks of the proposal as you're working along if you're piecemealing it. And the TAB programs can provide that service as well, but they're going to want to look at a proposal that's pretty well written. You're like ready to send it in. You want one more good review, of a well-drafted proposal. Then the TAB programs can help with that too. So the sooner you start, the better. Just start doing the brain dump, putting information in place that you already have, and knowing what. And by starting to put stuff down in place, you'll start figuring out where you got to start getting more information and filling in gaps and figure out what's going to be time consuming. So Ken, you want to go ahead? So can never overemphasize, make sure you read all the instructions and the guidelines and follow them. And again, make sure they're the latest ones, not last year's. There are a lot of sections and subparts and even some subparts. Don't miss any of those. And what I would emphasize is don't skip over something and say, like in the narrative part of your proposal and responding to all those sections that, well, that doesn't apply to me or that doesn't really fit us. Try not to leave anything blank. If something doesn't fit, then explain why not. Because if it's not addressed at all, then that's 0 points. So you want to, and you may have just skipped it and not realized it. So make sure to not leave anything unaddressed in your narrative part of your proposal. And sometimes you'll see where a piece of information or something you've written up may answer several or a couple of different parts of the criteria, different sections and subparts. Repeat it as necessary, kind of like the shampoo. Use, rinse, repeat. Use your whole 15 pages you're given, and it's better to repeat it a few times so people don't have to go back through your proposal and think, yeah, I think I read that 3 pages ago. Where was that? I got to see if I can find it. Make it as easy for the reviewer as possible. So to the degree that you can repeat things, even though maybe in a different context, but stay within your 15 pages, don't be bashful about doing that. And of course, there are very specific format requirements in the guidelines. Everything from font size, number of pages, margins, and so forth. Please follow those religiously and know what they are, because if you're outside the margins, for instance, they may just cut it off and those words are gone, or won't get copied the way it's supposed to. And if you send in 18 pages and it's supposed to be 15, the last 3 pages will not even get sent to the reviewers. They'll never see them. So, stick to those format requirements and know what they are. And when you send in these proposals, what you want to send in is a copy-ready proposal. In other words, something that somebody can walk to the copy machine, stick it in there, and run a copy. You don't want any folded-up pages. You don't want color pages because they're going to be copying these in black and white. It's particularly a problem with some fancy maps. Make sure the maps are understandable in a black and white format, not just color. And don't put binders on them. There's no bonus points for nice fancy binders. You want it so they can pull it out of the envelope, stick it right in the copier, and start running copies, just like you would in your office. And that's important because a lot of things get lost and stuff when they have to start peeling these things apart to run it through the copier. So you don't want that to happen to your proposal. Go ahead, Ken. And when it comes to the substance of these proposals, you really want to tell your story, and you want to be able to put your whole heart into it. Every community has a story to tell. Every Brownfield situation has a story, and make sure that the story comes across. These are not meant to be just antiseptic, bureaucratic, hit the bullet points. It's like, make sure this narrative actually gets your story across of what your community is dealing with and where you're trying to go, which means you want to develop a vision. There should be some vision of where community, you may know where you've been, you know where you are now, where are you trying to get to in the future? And make sure that it gets conveyed in a way that the person reviewing one of these proposals can understand what your vision is, where you're trying to go. With the understanding that visions do evolve and change as they become clearer and you get closer to them, but you at least got to have a concept in mind of where a community is trying to go, where you're trying to go with a particular brownfield site. But in doing that, make sure that you're being real and being honest. We're not talking fictional storytelling here. I know there have been at least one situation I'm aware of where a grant may have been retracted when it was found out that the grant writer got a little too creative and started making up stuff to make it seem more sympathetic, and it turned out a lot of stuff in the proposal was not even close to reality. So stick to reality, be honest and be true while you're getting that story across, but don't make up stuff that doesn't exist. And you also want to make sure your proposal is unique. It's your story, your community, your brownfield project. I know I've been a reviewer on these for many years, and when you're going through a stack of these and you start figuring out that 10 of them are identical word for word and about the only difference is the name of the town, then you start suspecting there's a lack of sincerity there. So you don't want to, if you're working with a grant writer, make sure your grant proposal tells your story about your project, and it's not 95%, some generic proposal or copy from somebody else. And that can be important. And as far as how you write a proposal, sort of the style, what I would call it newspaper style. And what that means is the first sentence or two really is important in any paragraph. It makes the most important points you have to make are right up front. We're not trying to create the great all-American short story or novel here. You don't wait and develop a plot and put it in at the end. Get your important points across, the things you are your high priority things you want the reviewer to know and understand right at the top, first sentence, beginning of a paragraph, and then as you lengthen the paragraph, you can always add more details to fill in. And again, it goes back to use the whole 15 pages to get your whole story in. But if you draft this thing, it comes out to 20, you got to get it back down to 15. Make sure the important stuff's at the lead part of each paragraph. So if you notice, that's how they do it in the newspaper. And you want to be positive in your proposals. There's no situation out there where there aren't negative things going on or concerns. Well, if that, then bad things will happen. Try to be positive. We're building on steps you can take to take bad situations, turn them into good situations, take communities and properties in a good direction. So, write these things in a positive way. Make positive statements. That comes across well to a reviewer because it lets them know that's where your mindset is and where you're trying to go. And an important thing, too, is these are grants that are going to be reviewed by people from different parts of the country. They may not have ever been, you may have a reviewer who's never been to your community or possibly even to your region of the country. So you can't assume that if you use certain local jargon or terminology or try to say things and be diplomatic and put it between the lines, they may not get it. So to the degree you have to be blunt or direct, make sure you make the points you need to make in a way that anybody in any part of the country can understand it. And they don't have to understand local terminology or understand what part of town this is by and well,
Just been reconnected.
Developers and that sort of stuff, that they may be a little hesitant to jump on board with the project, but they may say, well, if you get that done, then we may come in and do that. Well, take those ifs and develop them into things that those are, if not actual commitments by developers of things they're going to contribute to a project, then it may fit into plans they have. And bring that out in your proposal, that what you're doing is going to fit in with either definite plans or potential plans that developers or investors or other things going on adjacent to it or in the area that may complement what you're trying to do, or vice versa. So they may be qualified in some way, like, well, if this happens, then we'll do that. But again, state it in a positive way. Don't overstate it, but bring those things out. Now, one of the things, and this is something you can learn from the politicians, politicians are taking great at taking credit for everything and anything, whether they had anything to do with it or not. It's part of politics 101. And this is something you can do in your proposal. You need to find out what else is going to be going on anyway. Has the town or the county or the state already got plans to come in and improve the streets and add new traffic signals, and that's already on the drawing board? Well, find that out and bring that in, that's going to be something that your project may enhance. There may be other things that are already on the drawing board or in motion, and maybe you didn't cause it, but it's going to fit in with what you're doing, and maybe your project may help accelerate that, or convince somebody that they need to go ahead and plan to do that. Bring other resources into the general area of the project or the project itself. So a lot of things can be considered leveraging, even if you didn't actually do it on purpose. Take credit for it anyway, even if you find out about it accidentally. But that's why it's good to ask questions, find out what other people are doing, because there may be things that will enhance your project, and vice versa. What you're doing may enhance what they're planning. So take credit whether it's due or not. That's kind of the way it's really done. And that's all kind of the heart and soul of how to put together a good proposal. And I'm sure you'll have questions as you go through it, but if you follow those sorts of things, then that's, I think, what will help you to at least touch all the bullet points and have the basic package together that's going to get reviewed and probably as successful as possible. Now, there are some things I would mention that might be particularly helpful to small and rural communities. I live in South Dakota these days, so I'm very familiar with small and rural communities, do a lot of work with them. One thing you want to consider is the Targeted Brownfield Assessment Program. If you don't know what that is, you need to find out. It can be offered by your state or the EPA regional office. And in some cases, if it's a fairly small project, you might be able to get more out of that in the assessment process rather than going for an assessment grant, and then that data could be used to potentially then pursue a cleanup grant. So if you don't know about the TBAs, you need to look into that, talk to your state and EPA region about it. There are, and they vary from state to state, but a lot of regional development commissions, boards, organizations of various kinds, nonprofits do that sort of thing. If you don't know who they are, you need to find out who they are. A lot of them are already involved in brownfield projects, and some of you have brownfield grants themselves. They can be a big help with what you're trying to do, or maybe what you're trying to do may fit into something they were already working on. So make sure to hook up with those folks. That's especially helpful for small towns who don't have a lot of experienced folks to put in this kind of effort. Another thing to consider is maybe several small communities can work together or form a coalition and do a joint proposal to address several communities at once. And that kind of fits in with the next point about are you dealing with one specific brownfield site, or is it really the entire community has issues scattered around the town? So it's maybe more of an area-wide approach or a certain area of a county. So the area-wide approach might be better looking at what's around that one brownfield. Maybe there's a lot more than just one, and there are ways to take that kind of approach in your proposal if you look in the guidelines. And one of the things I always have to emphasize to folks in small towns and stuff is you really need to make sure to document your community participation efforts. You may not have as many large formal meetings and gatherings as some people think you should have, but there's a lot of information, there's a lot of meetings happening in town, and whether it's an official public meeting for the Brownfield grant, going to a town council meeting, or a large gathering at the, down the street, or, I don't care if it's the garden club or the bridge club or the book club, the veterans organization. Get out to all these groups, document the meetings you go to, and brief people on what you're doing, get them on board with what you're doing in the project, but document all that stuff. If you can have sign-up sheets or who attended the meetings, or make notes yourself. The notices that you put out, document those notices. I think a lot of small towns get a little overly dependent on the fact they think everybody already knows everything. And when it comes to document the community participation, they kind of get fall short a little bit because they say, well, everybody already knows everything. Well, somebody sitting in a regional office 1,000 miles away didn't understand that. So I think that's one weak point small communities have. The community participation is often great, but they're not very good at documenting it. So make sure to document that stuff and take advantage of every meeting. And you can use those meetings to try to get maybe not everyone in the community on board. Everybody's got their curmudgeons and naysayers. But, the majority of folks in town, if they know what's going on, they may get on board, support it, give more energy to your proposal. And that all feeds back to that point about developing that community vision. If the community's on board developing that vision, that can really provide the kind of the pull to the whole project. So instead of you pushing it, it's pulling forward. But make sure it's realistic is what you're trying to do. And with that, I think I was going to turn it over to Ignacio, who was going to talk about some of the changes in the guidelines from last year. So Ken, you want to?
Yeah, I will. Thank you, Mickey. I'm going to introduce Ignacio. Appreciate your good words and all the tips based on your experience. What I'd like to do now is to introduce Ignacio Dayrit. Ignacio is with the Center for Creative Land Recycling, or also known as CCLEAR. He's based out in the West Coast and provides technical assistance to communities all across the country. Ignacio also has a wealth of experience. For many years, he was the Brownfields coordinator and manager for the city of Emeryville, California, and well known across the country for developing one of the most effective brownfield programs across the country. He wrote and received many EPA brownfields grants and used that to leverage tens of millions of dollars for redevelopment in the city of Emeryville. And for the past several years at the Center for Creative Land Recycling, Ignacio has taking that experience and been providing it to communities around the country. So Ignacio is going to give us some more details on the specific elements of the various different types of brownfield grants. Go ahead, Ignacio.
Yeah, thanks for the plug and the kind words. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. And I'm going to take a few minutes to discuss the key features of the assessment, cleanup, and revolving loan funds. But before that, and I'll be repeating some things that Mickey said because they are important, and those are what reviewers look for. Mickey did say that you don't do fiction, but you need your story to you need a complete picture for your story. Think about your demographics and your brownfield issues as your setting, and your project as your plot. It has to weave in together. The demographics and the impacts must have some correlation to the impacts that you're receiving from your brownfields, and your project should try to mitigate those. And the benefits that you cite in your grant proposal should relate back to those, and you are cueing those indicators by your project. One other thing is that, and Nikki again alluded to this, you have things that are going on now as far as maybe someone's doing repaving, projects like that. But those have a basis in different policies and plans in your community. It may be reflected in a general plan or a specific plan, a capital improvement program, or a comprehensive economic development strategy. And in these different documents, there will be aspects of it. You may not know this, but they address the sustainable and livability principles of the EPA and HUD and the Department of Transportation. And you should try to find these and focus on these in your grant application. At the same time, your project should be a part of these documents. You don't want to come up with a project or program that comes in from out of the blue and is not related to anything, even if it is a sustainable project. It needs a basis in these different plans, and the more plans and documents you can relate your project to, the stronger it will be. Just to give a bit more background on the livability guidelines of EPA and HUD, those are on their website, but they include providing more transportation choices, promoting equitable and affordable housing, increasing economic competitiveness, supporting existing communities, leveraging federal investment, and valuing communities and neighborhoods. So those are the type of policies you look for, and your project should fit into those. And one other thing is your outputs. I'm going to be discussing outputs a bit later on, but outputs are the direct activities from your grant. So it's your reports, it's a number of cleanups, it's a number of community meetings. And you have to demonstrate that you can deliver on those. You can demonstrate that you can deliver on those based on current or past experience and or training. And if you've given thought to that and maybe figure out that you might need help, you can come up with a program to obtain this help, whether it's from hiring or retaining consultants. And your outcomes and longer-term benefits, which are basically your outcomes, are outcomes such as affordable housing facilities, jobs created on brownfields. These are the type of things that you will also report as outcomes in your project. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to be, for those of you who have applied previously, you don't want to take last year's or, proposals from 2 years ago and just kind of revise that. You might have to do an overhaul because the guidelines have changed. There are 2 notable threshold criteria changes, and there are also a number of ranking criteria changes. The first threshold criteria change is that if you received an assessment grant in fiscal year 2013, and that's whether it's directly to your entity or if your entity is part of a coalition, you cannot apply for an assessment grant for fiscal year 2014. The second key threshold would be community involvement is now part of the threshold criteria. It used to be a ranking criteria, but now you have to demonstrate to the EPA that you provided notice and discussed your grant application with your community. Now, given the holidays and meetings not being held during this period. Some of you may be challenged in putting these meetings together. And if that is the case, please contact your regional representative as soon as possible, because if you are not able to demonstrate this and not have a paper trail of the meeting or your community notification, then you might be disqualified at the threshold level. Now, the rest of the changes are ranking criteria. And really, they made these changes actually to help you. In the past, the EPA guidelines and questions were sort of grouped together. They asked many questions in one section. And you would try to answer them, and you'd leave certain things out. The guidelines and questions are written in a way so that you are more forced to address them, because not only did they reorganize, the EPA reorganized the questions, but they actually subdivided them and put them in smaller increments so that you are almost forced to address them and don't lose out on those points. The guidelines point distribution also have put more emphasis on the livability principles and sustainability, on community involvement, in that you are reminded to not only reach out to your environmental agency, not just for getting the letter, but for other things, and I'll get to that later. And also to connect the dots between your needs, the impacts, your project, and the benefits. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going now to tips for the different types of grants, and starting off with the assessment grants. And as Ken mentioned, these provide $200,000 each for hazardous materials and petroleum. There's a 3-year grant period, and there will be approximately $40 million available, spread for, over 189 grants, and that's an estimate, of course. Now, since these grants are very competitive, EPA does want to know that you've done your homework and really thought long and hard about applying for this. And Nikki described some of those, some of the reasons why. What you want to do is be sure to not just check the targeted brownfield assessment and your state programs, but there may be other EPA technical assistance or technical assistance from your state that could fill in some of those planning needs. An example of those would be the EPA building blocks or the smart growth grants that are available on a periodic basis. And some regions also have specific programs designed for their brownfield stakeholders. Now, to expand upon what Nikki said about deciding between community-wide and site-specific, if you're not decided, just take note that if you're applying for a site-specific grant, there are a lot more, considerably more threshold questions to address. And this will take a lot of time, and if your site is complicated or has additional, I would guess, regulatory complications, you might have to go through a property-specific determination. And this could delay your start in working on the ranking criteria. So for threshold questions, please contact your EPA regional office right now if you haven't done so already, because not even the tabs can help you with that. You can provide an opinion, but their EPA's is the last word. But one other exception to this, though, is for site-specific petroleum applications. Since petroleum sites applications are historically have been less competitive, you might consider doing a site-specific petroleum assessment. For coalitions, particularly for smaller communities, it's important to find partners with common goals and with a commitment to carry this program forward. There are examples of very well-designed coalitions. I'm familiar with a couple out here in the West, and we could refer you to them, see how they designed theirs, because these coalitions have followed up with numerous assessment and cleanup grants. And again, discuss technical assistance and resources that you've tried and considered and decided not to pursue, or if you pursue them and receive them, then please mention it, because this shows the EPA reviewer that you have done your homework, and not that it's a last resort, but the EPA Brownfields funds could further your Brownfields objectives. Next slide, please. Now, again, for assessment grants, a site prioritization is one of those tasks, of course, for these are for community-wide assessments, that are key, and EPA would probably be looking at as to whether you've given any thought to. Choose the sites, or at least create criteria, and this would probably be in draft because you have to check back with your community once you get your grant. But your draft criteria should align with your community's overall plans and the sustainable and livability principles. And it's also important that you have projects that are imminent, that are closer to development. That is not necessary, but it usually gives you a competitive advantage. And access challenges. There are many community-wide grant applications that experience this challenge, especially when there are properties which the applicant does not own. So these are areas owned by public or private entities, and where access agreements are necessary. So please give that a lot of thought before and put your ideas and your proposals down in your grant application. Environmental oversight structure is another key goal. And particularly for community-wide assessment, different types of contaminants have different oversight structures. In different states, there are health agencies and environmental agencies, and even workforce or occupational agencies that handle different aspects, which you might think of as contamination. Asbestos and lead may be handled by a different agency. Petroleum contamination is normally addressed by a separate agency from the Hazardous Materials Agency. So think of these and bring this up in your grant application. As the partners, and that's why it's very important to meet early on and have a meeting, is that you may have resources in your community that are willing to participate and strengthen your team, and may even preclude hiring a consultant. This is a form of leveraging, and it makes your proposal much stronger by checking in and obtaining the expertise from within your community. After you build your team, you can figure out, well, what strengths do I have and what gaps do I have in finishing out my work plan? And so you can cost out consultant fees, meeting costs, training costs, and put this into your budget and recheck your budget as you go along. Because in many grant proposals I've seen, the budget is actually filled out at the back end, And you will find that if you receive the grant, you end up trying to change the budget because you missed something out, missed out on something. So this is something that you have to recheck as you go along. So that's it for the assessment grants. I'm going now to the cleanup grant tips. There is 14 million approximately available for 61 grants. And after an assessment, a project should be closer to the redevelopment, and cleanup falls within this timeline. So you want the project on this brownfield that you're cleaning up to be almost imminent or ready to go, and will provide economic and non-economic benefits. Ideally, they're part of the overall goals, again, that I referred to earlier, and again, fits within the livability principle. You should be starting or almost done with your ABCA, with your analysis of brownfields cleanup alternatives, which assumes that you're already done with your phase 2. The ABCA will cover items such as your oversight structure and the components of your remedial action plan. And in that plan, be sure you consider low-impact remediation alternatives and protection of the community surrounding your brownfield or any transportation routes to and from your brownfield and your disposal site if you are hauling off soil or groundwater. Or if you're doing any on-site treatment, then you certainly want to monitor any kind of emissions from that site. And then think about cost share and leveraging. Now, your cost share, communities have used dumping fees from their county landfills as a contribution. They've used their public works, equipment rental fees, other cost shares that could be put in to demonstrate and to fill in your 20% cost share. As far as leveraging, you want to identify those that have already been committed and those that you are looking into. And this could include the money a developer might put in for a construction of a building and any kind of site improvements, which could be considered as part of the remediation. For instance, a parking lot might be your tap for your contamination you're leaving in place. But be careful not to put that in your cost share. Keep your cost share to the 20%, and anything additional put in leveraging. The more leveraging, the better. Contact any job training providers or workforce development providers early to see if they have trainees, especially if these trainers have actually received an EPA job workforce development grant. A good lead for those are your other good leads for those are environmental consultants. They may have hired from these training programs, or remediation contractors may have also obtained employees from that have received job training grants. Next slide, please. I'm going to the revolving loan funds now. Now, for revolving loan funds, and of course, you can provide sub-grants under this, but I'll try to focus on the loan portion of this. There are approximately 10 million for 10 grants, and this is probably the most involved as far as planning a team, because EPA will look at your capacity to implement this. And if you're interested in a revolving loan fund, it's a good idea to check, to interview an existing grantee and a past grantee. And even a past grantee that gave up their money, they gave their money back to EPA, it's a good idea to talk to them to see, what their challenges were, why they decided not to pursue it. Because there are many, many successful RLF grantees, and they receive supplemental grants year after year because they are able to turn these into really produce many loans. And when these loans come back to the community, they come back as program income, which have more flexibility than money coming directly from the EPA. So it's your program manager, fund manager, and the relationship between your site manager and regulatory agencies are key. And demonstrating this to the reviewer will give you a leg up on your competition. Other things to think about is having a strong business and management plan. Think of yourself like a mortgage lender. If you're selling your product, you want things clear up front. And though there is a 5-year window to implement this grant, and you want to save as much of this time to market and provide loans. Many communities take a year and a half to develop this business plan, and you lose time in implementing your grant. And the shorter you can show EPA you can get to actually providing your first loan or your first sub-grant, the more competitive you are. Now, a word about site prioritization, especially if you have sub-grants. You have to show clearly how you are going to prioritize both the sub-grant portion of this, and if you have more borrowers than you have loans, how you plan to your cash flow and how you can keep your program moving without having to wait for loans to get repaid. Next slide. I'm almost done, and we're going to get to questions really soon. A clear oversight structure. This is a case where your site manager has to work closely with your environmental regulator. The RLF cleanup guidelines and the site manager roles come with very many prescriptive roles. And at every step of the way, before you can actually release funds, there are a number of reviews and documents a site manager has to accomplish, and these have to be run past your environmental regulator. So having that clear in mind gives you an idea of what kind of activities will be necessary. And so a clear oversight plan would be necessary. And again, if you're dealing with both hazardous materials and petroleum, these steps will be different. And you have to figure out if you will enroll in a state or tribal voluntary program or other programs. Some lead and asbestos cleanups will not fall under some state voluntary cleanup programs. And a strategy to address defaults. If a borrower defaults, there are both financial and environmental regulatory activities that you have to comply with, and you have to show to EPA that you can carry through in case your borrower defaults on you. Not only will you have to try to recover from your assets, but also you may have to come in and continue the cleanup. So you will need some site access. And also, again, contact your job training and workforce development providers. And leveraging. Similar to the cleanup grants, if you have these lined up and, in fact, make this a criteria for your cleanup, giving extra points to those who are ready to redevelop, EPA will look favorably in those that you've given thought to these to your site prioritization criteria. So that wraps up my presentations. I think we're ready for questions now.
Yes, thanks, Ignacio. I'm going to unmute Mickey as well. If people have questions, if you want to type them in, there's one basic question is, will the webinar slides be available? And the answer is yes, they'll be up on the NALGEP website, www.nalgep.org. I'd like to also introduce Stephanie Shakovsky, who's with CClear, who's also available to help answer some questions. We have one question just to clarify. There are a couple of questions actually on the new threshold criteria for community involvement. And just to clarify, Mickey, maybe you can help clarify here that I think it reads that that you have to explain how you intend to inform the community, not to document that you've already done it. Is that as a threshold criteria? Mickey, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, let me clarify that, because part of the confusion is it's different between assessment and cleanup. It's a new requirement this year for the assessment grants as a threshold criteria that they provide a basic statement on how they intend, assuming they haven't started already, but they at least intend to do community participation and all that, and then provide a reference to that part of the narrative proposal where they go into more depth, maybe describing your community participation program and steps they're going to take. So on assessment, they only have to provide that information at a minimum anyway of what they intend to do for that part of the project. For cleanup grants, it's more like, was stated that they have to provide some documentation of meetings that have already been held and copies of the proposal provided for public comment, that kind of stuff. I go to the guidelines on the cleanup grant, and it is different than what you see under the assessment part. But the key is that it is a threshold criteria this year for both of them, even though they are different. So make sure to address, depending on which kind of grant you're doing, that you know what those requirements are and address them up front.
And then just to elaborate that further, we have a second question that's regarding the threshold criteria, and I think you partially answered this, but do we need to have a demonstrated record of outreach related to this application, or can we use our general outreach and education on our previous Brownfields programs and activities that we've conducted over the past 12 months?
Well, this is Mickey, and I guess that's a split answer. Again, if it's a cleanup grant, then you have to have done the public participation for the proposal you're submitting for that particular cleanup project and site. So it's sites or project specific for that proposal. If it's an assessment grant, then yes, if you have already had, done some assessment work or even a grant before and have a lot of that already in place, then I would make that point that you've already have been doing that, are doing that, and of course intend to continue doing that and implementing a new assessment grant if you're successful. But I would definitely emphasize anything you already have experience in or have already done to show again that you can, not that you intend to do it, but you have been doing it.
If other people have questions, please type them into the question bar. I guess I have a question to elaborate further. If folks are looking at doing either a community-wide or a site-specific assessment grant, can you guys talk a little bit more about the situations in which and you would pick community-wide versus site-specific and the pros and cons of doing both?
Mickey, you want to go first?
Well, I think site-specific, you definitely get into some other things you've got to address both in threshold and in the proposal on the specific qualifications of that site as far as the type of contaminants, ownership issues, site access issues. There's a lot of things that come up with a very specific site. Of course, some sites, are very large, so even though it may be one site, it's still a big project, so it might, be best to do it on a site-specific basis. The area-wide, a lot of times it's has a couple advantages. One is that you don't pin yourself in a corner right up front in the proposal process, just having to deal with some of those site-specific issues. Those can be dealt with later as you work with your EPA region to implement the grant and use the grant funds on specific sites. Then you can deal with those site-specific questions and issues at that time. And one advantage to that is if a problem does come up, then you have other sites, so that you can switch priorities. If you get hung up on one site, well, you can switch over and start working on a different one. There's a lot of things that can happen to start all of a sudden hold up a project on a specific site. So having that flexibility and be able to, change priorities on the fly can be advantageous, especially when there may be other things going on that can cause you to want to change priorities even after you've gotten the grant. So I think it's a matter of flexibility. It's probably the big difference. If you have a number of sites in a given area that potentially could be working on, but some projects just lend themselves that that's what it is. It's a specific site, and you need to address those issues.
And my experience also is that typically, unless you have one site that is just a huge priority and it's a significant site, that flexibility that the community-wide assessment gives you is very advantageous. And particularly, you can do investigations at the same time on multiple sites. You can advance the ball on multiple sites. And secondly, oftentimes redevelopment is dictated by what sites are ripe in terms of your partnerships with local private developers, and those things can change over time, and having that flexibility to adapt to the market changes can be very beneficial. Another question I was going to ask you guys is, can you say a little bit about things that people need to think about in terms of whether they're applying for petroleum grants versus hazard assessment grants?
Well, this is Mickey. I'll touch on that a little bit. I think part of that comes from how much knowledge you have of the site, how much history is well known. I mean, if it's a corner gas station and it's always been a gas station as far as anybody can remember, and you know what the issue is petroleum from underground tanks or other practices at the station, it may be fairly clear cut. A lot of sites, though, even though they may have petroleum underground storage tanks, there's a lot of other things that went on that property, either in the distant past or while they were operating, so that there's a lot of potential for other hazardous things to be there besides petroleum. So you may have to look at it as, is this a combination of those things, or really two different sets of problems on the same sites? And so that provides some different options on maybe which kind of grant funding you pursue. But you don't want to get locked into one approach, and then as you get into working on the site, find out you guessed wrong, and you really got a whole lot of stuff to deal with that it wasn't. You thought it was all petroleum and it's not, or you thought it was just other chemicals, and guess what? There's a bunch of petroleum tanks there. So again, you don't want to take wild stabs at it, but try to get as much history and past knowledge on the site as possible and see what's the best fit, which scenario is going to work the best for you.
And what's from your guys' experience, what's that dividing line from sites that, if it's got a mixture of petroleum and non-petroleum contaminants, can you, my assumption is you can apply for a petroleum grant, but, how does it work if it's got petroleum and non-petroleum contaminants?
Yeah, this is Ignacio. Normally, EPA will tell you that if the contamination is distinguishable. So if you can see contamination coming from a former gasoline station site, then definitely you can go for petroleum. But if you suspect there is hazardous materials also, then you can apply a portion for petroleum and a portion for hazardous materials. Now, if your contamination is commingled, then the default is to apply for hazardous materials.
Do we have any other questions from the audience before we wrap up?
Yes, Ken, I think they can't enter questions into a box. I don't think they have a box, so you might want to, maybe there's a setting.
They don't have a box. I got a bunch of questions for a while.
Okay.
The box. So I'm not seeing that. I mean, people could raise their hands and I could unmute them if they have a question. Okay, I'm going to unmute Cindy Thomas. Do you have a question, Cindy? Hello, Cindy. Are you out there? Cindy Thomas. Okay, I'm going to try Donna Van Natten, or Nathan. Donna, do you have a question? Hello? Not sure people are able to talk. I see a question from Myrna Wharton. Hello?
No questions.
No questions. Okay. Looks like your hand is raised, but maybe not. Or maybe from earlier. How about Jay Estes?
Yeah, I actually have a question. What I did not hear you guys talk much about were the eligibility requirements in terms of the different types of organizations, entities that are eligible to apply, particularly for assessment grants. I've got a situation where I'm trying to make a determination if an organization is eligible, and am having a little difficulty based on the guidelines as I've read them. Could one of you guys please expand and talk a little bit about the eligibility requirements?
Sure. Who wants to take that? Mickey, you want to try that?
You want to? Yeah, you have to unmute me, Ken.
Yeah, now you are unmuted. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, I can take a shot. This is Mickey. This is one of those questions where particularly is good to talk directly to EPA, but you know, there is a section 3 in the guidelines for assessment that talks about, you know, who can apply, and I know sometimes might have it not be real clear as to which category a certain group might fit into. So I guess to provide any more answer to the question, I would need to have more information on what kind of organization or entity are you thinking of applying from the questioner.
Jay, can you give a little more background on the question, and we can probably help you a little more?
Sure. It's actually an economic development authority and what we're looking at doing is having them as the lead coalition member.
Yeah, those are quite a few of those do have and have received brownfield grants. Might want it can vary from state to state though, because it can depend on how they're chartered and so forth, and sometimes that requires a legal review by the EPA regional office. What you might want to find out first is, I assume there's probably a number of those economic development authorities in your state, and see if any of the other ones have already been down this road and received a grant. And
Yeah,
if they have, that may answer a lot of the questions right up front.
Yeah, I'm quite confident they have not. Our state has not received, in comparative terms, a lot of grants.
Okay.
The one thing I do know is that they have board members appointed by the city and the county,
Yeah.
which would be the other two coalition members.
Okay. I have a feeling that's something that's going to maybe be proposed to the EPA region and get a legal review on that from their perspective. And that's usually, my experience of having it when I worked at a region and dealing with groups like that, we often had to have some back and forth and let the legal folks ask the questions that they want to ask and get them answered. But that is an issue you want to address right up front.
Well, and I do have a call into Nicole in Region 4 right now, just waiting.
Yeah, I'm sure she can help you with that, because the terminology and the guidelines is or other quasi-governmental entity, and of course that's pretty vague, and it gets down to case specific on their charter and how their board's set up and all that. So I would work with Nicole in the region. She'll probably get that resolved for you.
Very good.
Thank you. In the guidelines, that could fall under the regional council or group of general purpose units of local government.
Right, and typically EPA tries to be flexible for those types of organizations, is my experience. But there may be some occasion, depending on the charter in your particular state, that might make them ineligible for a certain reason. But if they tend to be an arm to some degree of a quasi-public entity, then they're typically eligible.
Okay.
But I would say talk to Nicole.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Anybody else have their hand up with a question? Raise your hand, please. I don't know if Emma has a question. Emma Feisey?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Sure.
I had a question about the checklist that appears at the end of the grant guidelines. Does it need to appear as part of the 15-page limit, or is it supposed to be included as part of the transmittal letter? It looks like there are just a couple instructions are just slightly unclear on that.
Yeah, I believe, this is Ignacio, I believe that's an attachment. It doesn't count to the page limit.
Okay, great.
Yeah, this is Mickey. I would agree with that. That's been a discussion, because I think there are some wording on some of the guidelines that may be a little inconsistent, but from what I understand, it's an attachment to the cover letter, and that table can reference where in the proposal narrative they can find more detailed information on specific topics.
How about Jeff Hawkins? Do you have a question? Hello, Jeff Hawkins.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can.
Quick question. I came in late to the webinar. I apologize, but can you talk a little bit on the how the EPA's for assessment particularly going to look at assessing or splitting the funds for consideration if you've previously been funded, not necessarily last year, but previously. They've indicated like they're shooting for 50% of the funds to go towards communities that have not been awarded funds.
This is Ignacio. My understanding is that that is what the special, the other considerations attachment that was just discussed. They don't call them. They don't they're not necessarily tiebreakers, but they really, EPA has not really mentioned whether they favor one or the other. Showing a good track record would, if you have success in your previous grants, then that cannot hurt you and increases your score. One thing I didn't mention, but I should mention now, is that when you're asked for previous experience with grants, whether it's EPA grants or other federal or state grants, you're asked to demonstrate your track record. And if you show a good track record in meeting your requirements and showing success, then you get all 14 points. And you don't, and so that would, it won't play in, the special considerations will not play into your consideration if you score high enough.
But don't you get penalized though for, in essence, if you previously were awarded funds?
No, not necessarily.
Because I know that they're looking to try to push them more towards communities that have never received it before.
I think they're looking for a balance, truly. There may be some effort to push more towards new communities, but they certainly will fund communities that have received grants before.
Yeah, it's certainly something you can ask on the 10th when they give their own webinar. But I don't see a bias one or the other. They do want a balance.
All right, let's make this the last question since it's 3:30. Does Paul Wisniewski have a question? Hello, Paul.
Yes, I was wondering if there was a way to get a copy of today's presentation.
Yes, we're going to put it up on the NALGEP website, which is www.nalgep.org.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep. So with that, thanks so much to Mickey Hartnett and Ignacio Dayreed. Thanks so much, everybody, for participating. We had a huge crowd today in the webinar. Sorry for the brief technical difficulties in the beginning. Please feel free to contact any one of us. Here are our email addresses if you have further questions or want some more information. So with that, thanks everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.